Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our honorable panelists, participants, and guests on Facebook Live. We are coming on live from Jerusalem and Haifa, and we'll meet a lot of people from all over the world. As of now, we have had over 13,000 viewers on Facebook Live from yesterday's sessions, and we hope everyone is with us today. My name is Chava Kari. I'm the director of the MASHAV Carmel Training Center, and today moderating together with me is Sarah Wilner, deputy director of the center. So, it is said that we have confronted the world's most severe crisis since World War II. There are many questions that we seek answers for in today's proceedings. We know the virus does not differentiate between women and men, boys and girls, yet why do we find that women and girls are affected more severely? During yesterday's deliberations, we heard that economic stress on families as well as the lockdown puts women and children at a greater risk of exploitation, gender-based violence, and reduces already limited access to sexual and reproductive health services. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from world leaders about gender-responsive policies that are needed and those that are being put in place. I'd now like to ask our host, who's with us from Jerusalem, Ambassador Gil Haskel, head of MASHAV, Israel's Agency for International Development Cooperation, and Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to please open the conference. Gil. Once.
Okay.
Laura.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Gil, please.
Okay.
Gil?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I hope you can hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay.
excellent.
Thank you, Chava, and shalom to all of you from Jerusalem. As the head of MASHAV, Israel's Agency for International Development Cooperation, I've had the chance to open numerous conferences and international events, but this is by far the most unusual and unconventional format yet. It's true that as we dig deeper into the COVID-19 era, such conferences are turning into the new normal. But nevertheless, we will always miss our physical contact and the unique energy of bringing to one hall at the MCTC, the MASHAV Carmel International Training Center in the beautiful coastal city of Haifa, representatives from all over the globe for MASHAV's traditional international conference for women leaders that has been taking place for the last 32 years, every second year. Yesterday, when I looked at the participants, I saw some familiar faces, many familiar faces who participated in past conferences in Haifa at the MCTC. And when I look at the participants now, I can also see some familiar faces of graduates and former participants in our physical conferences. I truly hope that this e-conference is a first and also a last. This year's conference will analyze the socio-economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on women and girls and provide a platform for leading figures from all over the world to discuss its impact. The State of Israel, through MASHA, has been focusing for the last 6 decades on assisting vulnerable communities throughout the developing world in over 140 different countries in addressing day-to-day human development challenges through techniques, technologies, and best practices that have been proven effective in Israel's rapid development experience. In the constant attempt of leaving no one behind, we know that the chain of development in each country and each community is as strong as its weakest link and its weakest social subgroup. In too many cases, these vulnerable subgroups and girls, and this has very much been amplified during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is exactly the topic of our conference, which I proudly declare open for the second day today. We had a very successful day yesterday with very meaningful and interesting presentations, panelists, and discussions. And I'm sure today will be equally fascinating. I'd like to thank, on behalf of MASHAV, MCTC, and the government of the State of Israel, all the hundreds of participants that have registered and participated yesterday and will participate today in this conference, and especially to all our senior panelists. Today we're expecting to have the Vice President of Colombia and the Deputy Prime Minister of North Macedonia and the Foreign Minister of Ghana, and many more dignitaries from countries and from UN and international agencies, who have all taken time off of their heavy duties and busy schedules in these trying times for all of us, and agreed to share with us their perspectives on the impact of COVID-19 on women and girls. Yesterday, Chava thanked all the organizers, and I'll ask her to do the same again for all the new participants, but I would like to take this opportunity and to take a minute and to thank the MASHAV Carmel Golda Meir International Training Center for organizing and hosting all of us today. The MCTC is the first of its kind center in the international domain of women empowerment, which was established in the early 60s, long before the issue of gender and gender equality and equal opportunities became a mainstream issue all across the globe. The main goal of the MCTC is to enhance women and men's skills in order to contribute to the development process of their countries and communities. MCTC conducts physical and online training activities and high-level conferences both in Israel and overseas to advance women's participation in public life. Along the years, MCTC has focused on 3 areas of study: women's leadership and empowerment, innovation and entrepreneurship, and early childhood education and development, all in line with the 23 Agenda for Sustainable Development. To date, over 23,000 women and men from over 147 different countries have benefited from hundreds of training activities and conferences. And our conference today is yet another one of those important platforms for exchanging ideas and perspectives. This is the second part of our conference, and I'm sure it will be equally fascinating and impactful like the first part. I would like to thank all of you and wish us all an interesting and timeful interaction and deliberations. Shalom and thank you.
Thank you very much, Gil. Thank you for your words, your inspirational remarks, and for championing the agenda of women's rights in MASHAV and at the ministry. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank your team at MASHAV, Ambassador Savion, Shuli Curzon Van Gelder, Liat Baron, and the IGUD, the staff of the IGUD, as well as our amazing team here at MCTC. It's not easy to do a conference on Zoom, as you all know already. There are a lot of elements, a lot of speakers, presentations, and it's a team effort. The MASHAV Carmel Training Center in Haifa, Sarah Wilner, the Deputy Director, Nuria Levy, Anna Androchnik, Katrina Rudenko, and Yuda Michael, all of whom, together with MASHAV and the IGUD, have made this conference possible. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gil, and thank you to everyone. For the benefit of those who were not with us yesterday, we'll show a very short clip that will introduce the conference.
MASHAV is Israel's International Development Cooperation Agency and international aid agency. MASHAV was established by the Foreign Minister and then Prime Minister Golda Meir. And MASHAV, in its 63 years of history, has trained scores of trainees from all over the world.
We believe that together, women of the world can make a difference.
It's quite evident that COVID-19 has amplified social inequalities, specifically towards women and girls. And this will be a fascinating opportunity to discuss this impact in this e-conference conducted by MASHAV and by MCTC.
Women's endemic economic disadvantage is exacerbated in times of economic crisis. The fact that women have a disparate level of care responsibilities affects them more severely in a situation where people have been deprived of social services, and domestic violence has been enormously exacerbated by the lockdown. The last thing is government policy has to be gender sensitive.
We will hear from prominent world leaders how today they are using these challenges and making productive, innovative ideas in order to make changes in the world.
MASHAV decided to concentrate its activities in two parallel streams. One is humanitarian assistance to communities in need all over the developing world. And the other, we have been training trainees from well over 150 different countries through electronic and virtual platforms to keep the connection between MASHAV and trainees from all around the world.
We have to fight for social solidarity as women and for women, as well as for men, families, and communities.
We hope that this e-conference will be as effective as the conferences we usually have here. We hope to greet you here next year in Israel.
I want to thank MCTC for organizing this very important e-conference, and to thank all the participants that will take time out of their very busy schedules and come together and discuss how to make our world a better world, even though we're under a COVID-19 pandemic.
We didn't hear you.
Oh, it's better not to hear me, but I'll put on the microphone. Thank you to all the world leaders that have come together today, and especially to those who have agreed to speak at this conference. Thank you all. Before we start the first panel, we'll take another minute. I'll ask Sarah to explain the logistics of this e-conference to those who are joining today. Sarah, please.
Thanks, Chava, and thank you everyone for joining us. It's really exciting to have the second day of the Women Leaders Conference here, hosted by MASHAV and MCTC. This is being, as Chava said, streamed live on our Facebook page, as well as MASHAV's Facebook page and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Israel's Facebook page. So there's over 600,000 followers that can be joining us. And as Chava said, yesterday we had over 13,000 people watch. So we're really excited, and we're saying hi to everyone who's joining us on Facebook today. Also, your microphones are muted. You have control over your microphone, but please do keep your microphone muted at all times so that we don't have any background noise while the panelists are speaking. The chat at the bottom of the screen is open to anyone and everyone. So please feel free to join in the discussion and to ask questions. And at the end of the panel, we will try and take as many questions as possible from the chat, time permitting. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. We'd now like to begin with the first panel of today, panel 3, the socioeconomic implications of COVID-19 and gender responsive policies. I'd like to introduce our first speaker for the day, the Deputy Prime Minister of North Macedonia, Mila Tsarovska. Ms. Tsarovska was appointed Deputy Prime Minister in charge of economic affairs and coordination of the economic sector on January 2020. Previously, in the period from 2017 to 2020, she served as Minister of Labor and Social Policy. She is a long-standing human rights activist with extensive experience in the NGO sector and an expert in social protection, sexual reproductive rights, and gender equality. As a proven professional in her field of activity, Deputy Prime Minister upgraded her professional career and higher education throughout the years with numerous work positions and experience that involved direct communication with socially vulnerable and unprotected citizens. In her managerial capacities, she participated in dozens of projects in the spheres of social policy, encompassing different citizens such as Roma, youth, addicts, and covers topics such as domestic violence, sexual rights, and education of vulnerable groups. Due to her rich work experience, Deputy Prime Minister is engaged at 12 domestic and international organizations and is expert in her field. Deputy Prime Minister, we welcome you to take the microphone.
Thank you for introduction. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm really happy because we have a gender conference or women conference in this really specific time for all the world, but also for our country. I must start with an introduction that we fight for equality and responsive policies for women and men long period in the country, but also in the world. But in this specific pandemia period, it's really important all the policies and all the steps that we are taking as a responsible person in the countries to be sensitive and to be adapted to the women's and girls' needs in this time. I think that we as a country, as a government, try and specifically successfully adapt the policies that I will present to the needs of the women in a working life, but also we discuss a lot about violence and how to support and protect women in home. Why? Because this was a period where most of the women and children were at home. And this was a really challenging period, and I will explain a little bit more in the next slide. All the cuts that we have sometimes in the social system, in the health system, in education, in this period was really important to protect, to not give a possibility to have cuts in this important social issue or protective issue, and to invest more in an economy where the women are employed, or to support women that will not receive the services, because we know that kindergartens and schools were closed. In the period of closing, those type of services that are also supporting the women life to be to have a compensation services, or to have compensation for women that are at work to have a possibility to care for their children, but also to stay safe in houses, in home. And those was how to say our agenda, to have measures that will support people in the country, but also to support the businesses to protect the workplaces. And we create this type of activity. We have a really quick reaction. We have 3 packages till now in a period of 4 months after the pandemic. The total investment for these 3 packages that we developed together with all economic resources that we have, but also together with the Chamber, civil society organization, and the Ministry of Labor and Social Policy, is about 5.5% of GDP, or around 550 million euro. That maybe for the bigger country is a small amount of money, but for our country, it's really investment in supporting people in need, but also businesses in need for this COVID crisis. We can go to the next slide. All the socioeconomic policies that needs to support people and businesses start with supporting salaries, or to support companies to pay salaries to those workplaces that are maybe less productive in the last years, maybe for those companies that are in risk to fire people. And we identified that especially in the work-intensive companies, as a textile industry, we have a lot of risks people to be, especially women, to be fired. Why? Because they mostly work alone for the other foreign investors, and if they close their companies, mother companies in the other foreign countries, this will have a really big implications in our country. And that's why we said, okay, we will support all the companies with a minimum wage just to support and protect the workplaces. And we must to say that cover more than 100 employees, 120 employees in a 20,000 companies, especially in the work-intensive industries, where we have mostly the employees that are women. Also, we have more than 5,000 self-employed people with this measure that is covering minimum wage in the country. And according to the assessment that was done by independent think tank, Finance Think, in our country, they calculate that we save more than 75,000 jobs at risk. That is really big impact for our economy in the country, but also direct impact in economic conditions of those families that are in this moment covered with a minimum wage, thanks to these measures. Now we can go to the next slide. This was part that cover those that are on workplace and they need to receive minimum wage. But the second part was directly connected with the informal economy and people that needs to be part now from the part of the social protection system. Why? Because in this moment we have a possibility easy those that were in the informal economy long period of time now to become the social beneficiaries or to receive support by the social protection system, because we regulate new conditions, more flexible and more open. And this was a recommendation by the World Bank and all financial institutions, UN system also, because we saw that if we left them out and we didn't adapt the social security system and the social protection system, in this moment, we will have a lot of people that live under the line of poverty. And that's why we opened the system, and now they are protected during this period of crisis. But also we compensate for those that was not allowed to receive unemployment benefit, because unemployment benefit in our country is regulated by law. And if you, by your will, left the job in that moment, you are not allowed to apply for unemployment benefit. And we detect that this is not right. It's not something that can be useful in this moment. Why? Because especially women and those people that are more vulnerable in the country will be maybe manipulated in one moment. They will sign to be out of the workplace without their permission. And we said, okay, we will have a 2-month support for everybody that will lose their job through the unemployment benefit package. And this was really successful because all people were covered with payment, and they survived easier this period of COVID. That was really drastic and really open a door everybody to be without their payment, regular monthly payment. But not just this measure that support the people was active in people and companies in this period. Also, we continuously invest in active measures for employment. This means that we really find a capacity in the companies that open a new workplaces. And this was supported by the active measures for employment with a direct financial support for a new businesses, for companies that will employ vulnerable groups of people that are long-term unemployed. And we find that definitely this was a program that was in function in this period. And active measures for employment is more than 40% absorbed by the women. And we also take care of this program to be gender responsive, or to be responsive for women and girls in the country. When we come to the services that support women at home, especially those that were supported by the government to stay home and care for the children, needs to be safe at home. We are a country that face really big percentage of violence. We have all regulations. We also ratify Istanbul Convention. I must to say that still we have a violence against women. That's why we, as a government, prepare the law that it's not just domestic violence law, but it's a law that protects women on all forms of violence. And I expect in the next few months to be crossed through the parliament to be in a system of protection. But we create the campaign together with OSCE for reporting the abuser. We support civil society organizations to protect women through the services that they're offering, but we also strengthen the capacity of the state institutions to have more proactive teams that detect violence and also care for the women and children that are in violence, especially that the first period, first 2 months, in this period, we face that the institution doesn't recognize the violence, that they say, okay, there is no more reporting in this period. But when we are going deeply, when we are open the issue publicly, when we are proactively encourage the reporting of the abusers, in that moment we saw that the numbers are bigger, and that definitely we need a system for protection and more proactive institutions. And in that moment, all civil society organizations together with the institution create the atmosphere for a protection, and we are following this situation, and we are supporting the victims through the institutions, but also through the civil society organizations programs that they have. Next slide, please. For the next phase, we recognizing the need of 4 package. 4 package will be also for supporting the companies in their investment, but also for the people, and especially the giving the amount of money for the people in risk with a minimum wage, and as additional amount of money that needs to be spent in the economy in the country for the national products. And with that, we are moving the economy, but also in supporting the families to buy, products for home, and to have a better standards in this period. But also some specific program that is supported by the EU. It's giving a grant of 30% for all loan without interest for the companies that are funded by women. And this is really created measure that will support the companies that will be in the next period supported with the loans. And the next slide is last but not least, is that in all processes, the civil society organization, the chambers were involved, and they recommend, and also they criticize all the measures that they think that in one moment doesn't give a result. And we adapt the policies and adapt the measures to the needs of the people, thanks to the civil society organization and their cooperation, especially with the inspections. They follow the inspections, how they do their work, and they give a feedback every Thursday, every week. We had a response from their side, and this support really good measures that are gender responsive and give a good feedback to us. Thanks to everybody, and I think that we will have a good discussion after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your talk was very enlightening, and we believe that you and other women leaders sharing their experiences and policies and knowledge will pave the way for countries to look for responsive policies through a gender lens. So we really appreciate learning from you and the policies of North Macedonia.
Let me just add my vote of thanks to Deputy Prime Minister of North Macedonia, Mila Karovska. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. It's really meaningful from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate your being here today with us, and please stay with us for the question and answer period. I'm sure there'll be many. I see already 43 comments. Of course, we won't take them all. We won't ask you to answer all the questions, but at least one. So thank you very, very much. Okay, our next speaker was going to be Dr. Aminata Torre. She will not be able to join us today, unfortunately, as her brother passed away yesterday. We were just informed by the embassy, and we sent her our sincere condolences. Okay, now we are moving to our next speaker, which we are thrilled to have her with us today, Deputy Director General of FAO, Beth Bechtel. She's coming to us from Rome, and we're delighted to have her with us today. Beth Bechtel is the Deputy Director General at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations since March 2020. As I heard her say on a YouTube show, that she came 4 days before she was locked up, or she was locked down, and we'll hear from her about her experiences. In this new role, Ms. Bechtel continues her service to food and agriculture, now on a global scale. She is responsible for overseeing FAO's technical cooperation and program support, including resource mobilization, partnerships, South-South and triangular cooperation, as well as leading programs in the area of plant protection and production. Before joining FAO, Ms. Bechtel was president and CEO of Agri-Novus Indiana, the Midwestern State Economic Development Initiative focused on advancing the ag bioscience sector and developing 21st century talent. Prior to her leadership at Agri-Novus, Ms. Bechtel was director of agribusiness strategies at Indianapolis-based law firm Ice Miller, where she helped build the firm's dedicated legal practice for food and agribusiness clients. She also was the former deputy director of the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. Deputy Director Bechtel, would you please take the microphone?
Thank you very much, Hava, ladies and gentlemen, and to all of you who are out there listening today. I am honored to be part of this panel on behalf of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. I'd especially like to thank Israel's Agency for International Development Cooperation for hosting us and for the very, very, very kind invitation to participate. Although the COVID-19 pandemic is obviously a health crisis, it is also a food security and economic crisis that affects men and women differently and can significantly exacerbate rural poverty and hunger. I think it is important to highlight that women account for 37% of agricultural employment globally, a figure that rises to almost 50% in low-income countries. In addition, women are critical agents of smallholder agriculture and key sources of unpaid care and domestic work in rural areas. However, even before COVID-19, women everywhere faced major challenges. Globally, women own or manage more than 30% of all businesses, but only 5% or less of the largest enterprises. Women are overrepresented in low-wage jobs, often without social benefits. Worldwide, women account for less than 15% of the holders or owners of agricultural land, an important and critical asset for production and for accessing financial services. And FAO's own data show that the number of hungry people in the world is not decreasing, and it is unacceptably high. In all regions, the prevalence of food insecurity is slightly higher for women than it is for men. COVID-19 is exacerbating these already existing structural inequalities, increasing the burden on women as they struggle to fulfill multiple roles. In rural areas, the pandemic is disproportionately affecting women's productive and income generating capacities because it tends to reduce their economic opportunities, while at the same time increasing their workloads and escalating gender-based violence. My main message to this gathering today is that policy responses must consider women's roles in agri-food systems and ensure that their multiple needs as guardians of household food security, food producers, farm managers, processors, traders, wage workers, and entrepreneurs, all tied to global food and agriculture, are adequately addressed. I'd like to focus my comments around 3 main points. Next slide, please. First, governments, parliaments, civil society, the media, and many others must do more to ensure that women's needs are considered and then included in the fight against COVID. Women and girls must be a part of the conversations, the planning, and the solutions. Earlier this year, CARE International analyzed COVID-19 response plans in 30 countries from different regions. The study found that most decision-making bodies established in response to the pandemic are dominated by men. While most governments are attempting to mitigate the economic impact on low-income groups, a gender lens has seldom been applied in national response plans. Therefore, it is not clear if the COVID-19 responses will even reach women in rural areas. Some measures could even have a discriminatory effect. So what needs to be done? We need to ensure that rural women and their organizations and networks are at the forefront of the response measures to COVID-19. Several elements are important here. First, we need better data. Rigorous gender analyses based on reliable sex and age disaggregated data must form an integral part of assessing the impacts of lockdowns on rural areas. This will broaden our collective evidence base for more informed decision making. Second, we must invest in women's leadership and engage them in the design and implementation of COVID-19 response strategies. Equal participation of women and men in decision-making is crucial to ensure that their specific priorities are taken into account in development efforts, policies, and programs. There are several ways to do this. Perhaps establish quotas, reverse the slide, please. Perhaps establish quotas and targets for women's participation and leadership in national and local level committees and task forces, organizing responses to the pandemic. Leverage the participation of rural women's organizations and associations in the formation of gender-sensitive responses to COVID. There are some good examples of how informal groups, such as FAO's own Demetra clubs, are improving access to information on COVID and facilitating more two-way communication in very rural communities between men and women, local authorities, and health specialists. Second slide, please. My second point is that we must take action to alleviate the economic impact of COVID on rural women and girls. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic poses a serious threat to the livelihoods of rural women by hindering their engagement in economic activities as farmers, processors, traders, and workers. Considering past experiences with similar crises, such as the recent Ebola outbreak in West Africa, the restrictions on the movement of goods and people hampered women's trading activities, both across borders and between communities. In many instances, women were unable to pay back loans from village savings and loan associations, undermining their livelihoods. Based on the limited information that exists on the socioeconomic impact of COVID on rural societies, we can conclude that the pandemic is reducing the economic opportunities for rural women. Consider the following. In the Arab region, the COVID-19 pandemic could result in the loss of 1.7 million jobs, including 700,000 jobs held by women. In Africa, women constitute nearly half of the agricultural workforce and own 1/3 of small and medium enterprises. COVID-19 restrictions are undermining their ability to access resources and service for production, to find finance to keep their businesses afloat and earn incomes in rural markets. And in the Latin American and Caribbean region, 40% of women work in commerce, restaurants, hotels, and domestic work. These are the sectors most affected by COVID-19 shutdown measures and with particularly high risks of exposure to the virus after reopening. How can this be addressed? Governments need to adopt special measures to mitigate the economic impact of COVID on rural women and girls. FAO has identified these 3 key areas for policy action. First, put in place support mechanisms targeting rural women as producers, processors, traders, and entrepreneurs. For example, governments can reduce taxes for women-led economic activities or put in place relief funds and credit lines targeting rural women's enterprises. Facilitate women smallholders' access to markets by addressing the mobility constraints, transportation restrictions, and market disruptions that they experience. Examples of relevant innovations include mobile farm gate markets or electronic transaction systems to manage the purchases and sales of rural women's products. And third, provide temporary employment or cash transfers to enhance the capacity of rural women to earn an income and manage their risks. This will contribute to safeguarding their welfare and avoid harmful coping strategies such as selling off assets or reducing even important food intake. Last slide, please. Finally, countries, cities, and organizations will need to prioritize their support for rural women in their economic and social recovery from COVID-19. Countries must prepare for both immediate and long-term impacts of COVID on the agricultural sector, food security, and nutrition. This particular pandemic will have an incredibly long tail, and it will definitely have long-lasting impacts on global food systems. It is critically important to ensure that COVID-19 response and recovery measures fully consider women's key roles in agri-food systems. This requires integrating gender equality and women's empowerment in strategies and recovery plans, paying particular attention to informal workers and existing gender inequalities in the agricultural sector. It will also need to ensure that male and female farmers equitable access to and control over production resources, inputs, rural services, producer organizations, and collective action is maintained. And there will need to be an investment in rural women and girls as critical agents of change, ultimately, as we all know, to empower them to reach their full potential. Only in these ways can we ensure a more effective and inclusive COVID-19 response in some of the most vulnerable and most rural communities of our world. Thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this very important discussion, and I look forward to the other panelists' remarks and the discussion that will follow. Thank you, Hava.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your remarks. Inspiring, informative, and stimulating. Thank you so much. You gave us specific steps to be put in place in order to assist countries and communities. And we know that FAO is responding to numerous crises around the world, not only to COVID-19 pandemic, and quite a challenging job and a challenging time to take it over. So we wish you the best of luck in your new position. And thank you so much for taking time out to be with us today. So thank you very much. And I'm sure there'll be, I see the questions jumping up, so I'm sure there'll be quite a few questions for you later. So thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And we all know that FAO will be facing a very, very heavy challenge when the world comes out of COVID-19. Because I think especially the challenged communities and challenged countries will tackle the issue of food security, and I'm sure your hands will be full, and MASHAV is happy to be a partner of FAO. Thank you.
Thank you, Gil. Thank you, Beth. I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Christine Musisi, a great friend to MASHAV and to our center, who is coming to us also from her relatively new position in Tanzania. She is the UNDP resident representative. Christine brings 23 years of leadership and experience from the development arena. She has served the United Nations in different capacities and in various countries at national and global levels. Before becoming the UNDP resident representative, Ms. Musisi worked for UN Habitat as director for their external relations division, responsible for global partnerships, communication and advocacy, UN interagency and intergovernmental affairs. From 2012 to 2016, Ms. Musisi served as UN Women's Regional Director for Eastern and Southern Africa and representative for Kenya. Prior to that, she has held other senior positions, including Deputy Country Director for UNDP Ethiopia, Deputy Head of the Policy and Technical Cluster, and Policy Advisor at the UN Regional Center for Eastern and Southern Africa. Policy and Technical Advisor for UNDP in Africa and Central Asia as well. Ms. Musisi has led many innovative initiatives in local economic development, democratic governance, poverty reduction, and much, much more. A Ugandan national, Ms. Musisi holds degrees in gender development analysis, rural extension, and women. We want to thank you very, very much for being with us today, and please take the microphone.
Thank you very much, Hava. It's a real pleasure to be at this wonderful conference. Honorable Ambassador Gil Heskel, really pleased to be honored to be part of this conference. I would also like to acknowledge the Deputy Prime Minister of the Government of Macedonia, my UN colleagues, and all other partners who are participating today. I would like to say that this virtual session actually is in itself an indication of the changes brought about by COVID, the COVID pandemic, as I have had the privilege of participating in two conferences, leadership conferences in Haifa, Israel. And my hope is that while we can draw on and leverage the technology, we can still meet again in person in the near future. I would like to specifically appreciate MASHAV's commitment to strengthening the capacity and partnering with over 100 countries, bringing innovation, inculcating excellence and efficiency in addressing, agro-industrial challenges, entrepreneurship, and women's leadership. Now, looking at the context, while the pandemic has seriously affected the lives of women and girls, it has, as Honorable Gil said, brought to the surface the most vulnerable sectors in our economies and societies. There are structural challenges that have not been addressed over a long period of time. And the systemic discrimination against women and girls has been evident in the fact that they've disproportionately borne the burden of COVID-19. And this has in turn resulted in increased vulnerabilities and risks for women, which is a potential loss of human development gains that have been made over the past decades. Some countries are saying that COVID has taken them back to the 1990s, others to the 1980s. So overall, everyone has been affected by the pandemic, whether men, women, poor or rich. But the lockdown measures taken by national and local authorities, as well as private companies that are adhering to these aversion measures, have led to certain critical issues, including the increased violence against women, interrupted access to routine health services, loss of livelihoods, and the increased burden of care. I will look at a few issues that we need to address: the economic impact, health and well-being. I would like us to talk a little bit about the digital divide and also social protection, which I will not talk about so much because it was well addressed by the Deputy Prime Minister. Now, reports of UN Women and Oxfam recent report indicated that women are hit harder by economic impacts of almost all pandemics. Why? First, most women work in low-paying, insecure, and informal sectors. In Tanzania, for example, 51% of working women work in business, work in the informal sector or in micro, small, and medium enterprises. This means that they earn or depend on low daily wages. They have limited social protection measures and savings. They rely on one entrepreneur. And we found in Tanzania especially that women's sources of income are from sectors that have been hit hardest by the restrictions on movement and lower demand on export markets. These are sectors in tourism, hospitality, and trade. There has therefore been a significant decrease in sales. There are many businesses that have closed. There are delays in loan repayment, which leave women at high risk of losing their collateral. And where businesses are reliant on imported goods, they have halted completely. And with closure of borders, about 70% cross-border women traders have been badly affected in Tanzania, Uganda, Congo, and Kenya. I'm talking about my environment here in Eastern Africa. On the issue of well-being and health, we have found that with children out of school and the high cost of healthcare, women's unpaid care work has significantly increased. Considering that women are 70% of healthcare providers, worldwide, we really need to take this into account. We find that even as the school closes, women have a higher burden of taking care of their children. The issue of gender-based violence has already been talked about. And this is across the board, not only in Africa, but all around the world. Violence has increased exponentially up to over 30% in some countries. Now, on the digital divide, in this new era of remote working and business, the digital divide, which already affects billions of people worldwide, with about only 2 billion out of 5 billion mobile subscribers who have access to internet, has impacted women's opportunities for business continuity, for public participation and social engagement. We find that it limits their access to education, health, financial services, the ability to market and sell their products to new markets using information, using ICT, and the ability to participate in public forums, which also gives them the ability to access vital information that can help them influence decisions that affect their lives. Now, on social protection, we find that women in countries with high multidimensional poverty are more likely to lack access to social protection. There's a huge difference between developed countries and developing countries where social protection is concerned. And this pandemic has been very difficult because it has even impacted on remittances, because countries where remittances are often coming from, have also been affected. So this is a serious issue that we need to find solutions that can work for for developing countries. Now, looking at an engendered policy response, we need to have policy response that is forward-looking, while at the same time addressing the immediate needs and what we call the wicked challenges that have persisted over the years and decades due to the systemic discrimination against women and girls. I just want to mention that UNDP's strategic offer for COVID-19 has moved beyond recovery. The first offer we had was on preparedness, response and recovery. But now we see that countries need to move beyond that to moving forward, building back better and focusing on a more equal and sustainable world to achieve the SDGs. Even as we address the pandemic, we still need to keep the SDGs in mind. So I would like us to consider a few issues. One is that disaggregation of data on the impact of COVID-19 on women and girls in all the assessments is very important. If we do not measure it, we will not be able to make the right policy choices and decisions, and we will not be able to allocate the appropriate resources that are required. The second is that we need to prioritize women's health, psychological and other services. This will eventually speed up socioeconomic recovery. We find that in such situations, as more resources are poured into health services to address the pandemic, women's health priorities, psychological priorities, and other services are deprioritized. So how can we address the current pandemic without deprioritizing women's needs? Considering the role of women as carers, it's very important that we think about providing personal protective equipment also for women caregivers. The other important issue is that it's important that as we build back better, we look at sectors and industries that have collapsed or have been hit hard and help to build them in a way that is more gender responsive, more sustainable and environmentally sustainable, and also addresses the inclusion of micro, small and medium enterprises throughout the value chain. In Tanzania, we are doing this particularly for the tourism sector, working with the government of Tanzania, the government of Zanzibar. Then in bridging the gender digital divide, it's important that we conduct assessments that help us to build digitized economic and social frameworks, as well as very practical interventions that can empower women and girls in developing countries. UNDP here in Tanzania is already starting an assessment of the digital economy in the country and leveraging the facility that UNDP has developed jointly with the International Telecommunications Union. It's important to step up social protection, as has already been said, ensure access to quality, safe, and non-discriminatory public services, ensure widespread availability of emergency mental health and psychological support for women. It's very important as we move forward that whatever response we have, we do not just rush into a health response without looking at all the other socioeconomic impacts. It's important to build evidence, to build an integrated, coherent, and more inclusive approach to tackling the effects now and in the aftermath of the pandemic. It's important that as we develop those interventions, we go beyond addressing the problems now to helping countries to get back on track to be able to achieve the 2030 commitments. With innovation the digitized economy and new ways of thinking and working, I believe that that will be very possible. I would like to end my intervention with another word of thanks to MASHAV and the Golda Meir MASHAV Kamel International Training Center for this invitation, and I look forward to the discussions and really also look forward to meeting with you again when this pandemic is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine, for your captivating talk. And we know how passionate you are about transformative leadership and development solutions, and you have done so much in your numerous positions for the benefit of society. The priorities you mention here are very important for all of us to analyze and respond to in our countries. It is very interesting to understand what is happening in your region, and I'm sure we'll hear from a few other speakers from the region, and I think it's most important to understand what is going on all over the world. On a more personal note, I'd just like to mention, I know you just returned from the funeral of the former Tanzanian president, Benjamin Mkapa, and we would like to send our sincere condolences to the people of the United Republic of Tanzania and the family of the former president. So please do send our condolences.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd like to add a personal thank you to Christine, a very good friend for many years. We first met when Christine was a resident director of UN Women in Nairobi, and I was ambassador. Correctly, Christine, if I'm mistaken, I don't think I'm mistaken. And we actually cooperated together on promoting agricultural projects for rural women, which I think is very, very pertinent at this point of time of history of rural women in Africa and around the world. Thank you, Christine, as always, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Esquel, and thank you, Christine. Okay, we are going on to our last speaker for this panel, who's coming from Kenya, Dr. Janet Kabeberi Macharia, also a good friend, and we are very, very happy to see you with us today. Dr. Janet Kabeberi Macharia has a career spanning 30 years in academia, non-governmental organizations, and international development organizations, whose primary focus has been the promotion of gender equality, women's empowerment, and children's rights. Dr. Macharia is the head of the Gender and Social Safeguards Unit and is a senior gender advisor at UN Environment. In the past 25 years, Janet has worked at national, regional, and global positions for the United Nations in 3 different agencies: United Nations Development Fund for Women, UNIFEM, United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and today UN Environment. In the UN Environment, she coordinates a dynamic team composed of 5 full-time staff and a global network of over 70 gender focal points spread throughout the organization. Janet, we're extremely happy that you're with us today, and please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Hava. First, I want to give my appreciation to MASHAV and MCTC for this kind invitation. It's a great honor to make a presentation at this Women Leaders Conference, and also to continue appreciating the relationship that we have with MCTC in the Gender and Sustainable Communities program that we support and we've supported for the last 5 years, and also to appreciate the support from Gil. It has really been great to have him as a gender advocate. Thank you very much. My presentation today is diverting us to look at gender and environment and the COVID-19 nexus within the context of the policy response that UNEP has developed And thereafter, I will just make some recommendations, which have also been made by the other presenters in terms of how can we ensure that we have gender responsive policies. So in beginning, next slide, please. Just to bring everyone within the context, as much as we are looking at what has brought about the different impacts of COVID-19, we also know that the pandemic has brought into focus the delicate links that demonstrate that people and planet are one and the same. Whereas the pandemic has had especially devastating consequences, all over, we find that these consequences have affected people who are already at risk and has also affected the management of the environment. Certainly, negative human activities, for example, have adversely impacted on our well-being and way of life, and ultimately that of future generations. Our flagship report, the Global Gender and Environment Outlook, which was launched last year, already forewarned us that the world that environmental pressures and their impacts on health and well-being are not equitably distributed. In the last 4 months, UNEP has developed a COVID-19 response, and there are two key messages that are running through this response. First, that despite COVID-19 crisis, the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change still constitute our best and only global roadmap for the future. And Christine did allude also to us abiding and continuing with our initiatives to address the Sustainable Development Goals. The message that has come out is that COVID-19 does not provide a silver lining for the environment, but lessons learned from that, which we can learn from when we are addressing the environment management. For example, we have seen a number of photos of penguins walking in the streets of Napoli and all that, and everybody feeling very good that finally the animals have reclaimed their environment. This is not all. We must look back and see how we manage our environment so that we are able to deal with oncoming pandemics. Next slide, please. I don't think we're able to see the slide. No, before that, can we go to the second slide, please? Hello, Sarah? No.
Yes.
Go back to slides, please. Go back to slides.
Noria? Noria, can you go back one more slide?
Okay. In developing our response, our COVID response, I think you've gone to the beginning. In developing our COVID response, we are focused within the context of the UN's shared responsibility to address COVID-19. And in particular, our response is within the SG's response, the framework that has been shared by all UN agencies, and certainly FAO and UNDP have developed responses within this context. In particular, we are looking, the next slide, please. We have highlighted the environmental dimensions of the response that the SG has given us. Please, can you go to the next slide so I can quickly, yeah.
Igen, de nem kell megjelni az egész dobozzal. Jó? A felét.
Sorry, it's not clear. I don't know whether everybody else can see it. Please go back to the slide before so I can outline the environmental dimensions of the SG's Secretary General, COVID response. I'm sorry, Sarah, it's not clear.
Sorry,
I don't know whether
Janet.
everybody else.
We can see it.
Are you having...
Environmental dimension of SG response. Is this the slide you'd like?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'd like to see it, but it's not, yeah, thank you. The environmental dimensions of the Secretary General's response has highlighted 3 areas that we need to look at. That is, we address the pressures on wildlife, and that is actually looking at wildlife and biodiversity. We also we have to look at the green economy. I'm sorry, I'm not being able to see the slide properly. Could I share the presentation? Would that be easier, Sarah?
We do see it. Janet, we see it on our screen.
I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. Can you?
So Janet, why don't we,
sorry.
let's put you as co-host and you can share your screen. Is that easier for you?
Yes, it will be.
Okay, just one moment. Okay, I think you can share your screen now.
Okay, sorry about that. Everyone will sort it out just now.
No problem.
Yeah. Just give me 1 minute. I'm opening the screen.
Are you able to share?
Yes, I'm just opening it up.
Okay.
Sorry about this. Okay, tap now.
Is it working, Janet?
Yeah, yes, it is. I'm just opening it up now. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Are you successful, or we'll just put it back up on our screen and you can speak?
I'm successful.
Great.
And here we are. Are you seeing it now?
No.
Hello?
No, we're not seeing it.
Oh dear.
So we can just put up on our screen, as long as you see what you need to see. We can put up the slides that we have. Nuria, you can put up what we have, and Jana will just
Okay.
say.
Okay. Please, can you go to?
We have it up. You can.
Okay. Okay. Let me just go to UNEP's for responses. Oh dear.
Okay, we have it up. You can speak.
I'm actually not being able to see. Could you just refocus the
slide we have?
The screen? Refocus it. It's a bit blurred. I'm sorry about this, everyone. Let me just go back to talking on.
So maybe you can just speak, Janet, because we only have about 2 minutes left. So maybe you can just speak and
sorry.
And we'll move the slides.
Okay.
along.
Okay, the slide on UNEP's 3+1 response areas. This is just to introduce to you the 4 areas that UNEP has identified for the response. And in each of these areas, we have a gender intervention. The response areas are medical and humanitarian emergency phase, transformational change for nature and people, investing back to build back better, and the UNDP also mentioned that, and also modernizing the global environmental governance. In terms of the next slides, I'm just going to focus on 2 areas. That is on the transformational change for nature and people, which really which has a lot of gender interventions. And I will just be addressing 2 aspects of this UNEP pillar. The first one is on the improved science and policy options to better understand and respond to zoonotic threats, and also the investment in nature for improved human health, sustainable socioeconomic recovery, poverty reduction, and livelihood recovery. So I'll just give you a few examples of what we are talking about and what gender actions we have identified. And whatever we have identified is important for policy development. There's been a lot of questions in terms of what are zoonotic diseases. Basically, zoonotic diseases can stem from multiple unmonitored and drastic changes to the environment, such as but not limited to deforestation, land degradation, encroachment of the human population into wildlife areas, illegal wildlife, climate change, flooding, and famines. There are a number of examples of zoonotic diseases which we are familiar with. For example, Ebola, SARS, avian flu, MERS, Zika. All of these are examples of the deadly zoonotic diseases. Again, globally, we know around 75% of their new infectious diseases that are always coming out of which are zoonotic diseases, and about 1 billion cases of illness and millions of deaths occur every year from zoonotic diseases. Next slide. When we are talking about the gender aspects with respect to zoonotic diseases, we are looking at the roles that women play and how they are affected with their daily lives with respect to and how they get infected or are vulnerable to zoonotic diseases. We have information, I mean, and we've all read about it, that COVID-19 is believed to have originated from wildlife at wet markets, where wild animals are sold alive and sometimes illegally. We know that these markets are found mostly in Asia and Africa. For example, in Africa, we have markets that sell bushmeat, and we know it is women who trade in this bushmeat. And we also know it is women who are the majority of the buyers of this bushmeat. So that means it increases their vulnerability to exposure to diseases. And we have to address how do we, first of all, limit the trade in bushmeat or in this wildlife in the wet markets. But at the same time, we have to be aware that we have to address the alternative income generating activities for women who actually depend on sale of this meat for their daily living. So we also need to look into sustained outreach programs and communications on the linkages between nature, health, and sustainable living and gender equality, especially when we are addressing the vulnerability of women and of certain men to these zoonotic diseases. In the next slide, please. We are looking also at issues of access to water, food, and energy services. The presentation from FAO did address this aspect. And we have already started to do rapid assessments on impacts of COVID-19 on a number of our project sites, and examples from a study that we've just completed on rural women enterprises in Cambodia and Vietnam highlights a number of challenges, and I think we can draw parallels to other countries. One, and we have already heard, that women-led enterprises that are dependent on natural resources, such as trading in vegetables, rice, and other farm produce, have been adversely affected. And this is actually linked to what the FAO presentation by Beth also alluded to. Again, we also have seen that insufficient access to water for cleaning and sanitation, but particularly to protect our household members from COVID-19 is a growing concern. Because what's happening is that whereas households may have access to water for their use and consumption, this may not be enough to cater for the hand washing requirements. And you find that households are being forced to weigh between using the water for hand washing versus using the water to meet household needs. We also found that that in Cambodia, for example, where we have a renewable energy, gender renewable energy project, we found that communities in this region, whereas they would be willing to invest, they had already started to invest in renewable energy equipment. This has now gone down. But the main priority is to save cash for essential needs, and given that their own incomes have reduced. And also they do not want to take loans from commercial markets because they do not know how they'll pay for this, for these loans. And this trend might now lead to communities going back to using firewood to meet their household energy needs. Again, that is something that we're trying to get communities from doing, but you can see how COVID-19 can actually reverse some gains that we had already made in terms of improving on access to energy, renewable energy at household level. Next slide, please. The other pillar of UNEP's policy response is that of investing to build back better. And with respect to this pillar, we are looking at how to access, improve and access green jobs, especially for women. We've already heard from the other three presenters how women's businesses have been affected, and we need to see how can we enhance access to green jobs as we are trying to build better. So the next slide, I just give a few points in terms of how.
Janet, I'm sorry, we'll have to stop here because we only have 5 minutes left for the panel and we want to leave a minute for the questions. So we'll be happy to send your presentation to everyone. So if you could just sum up and then so that we can leave 1 or 2 minutes for questions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, I'll just give the recommend. I was actually going to the second last slide. I'll leave a bit about the green jobs. In terms of our recommendations, we are recommending that we need dedicated attention, specific attention through policies and interventions to support business opportunities on women and youth entrepreneurs in the green economy. We also need to develop and implement gender-sensitive initiatives in order to better assess the implications of COVID-19 and future zoonotic diseases upon the population. Building back better can only be truly achieved through the equal inclusion of all. And everyone has pointed out the importance of collection of sex disaggregated data and inclusion of gender analytic data to support policy responses. And also input the data disaggregated by sex and other social economic factors are crucial towards budgeting for sustainable economic recovery. I will stop there, Hava, and my apologies to everyone, but I will share the presentation for sharing with participants.
Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting, and we thank you very much. We know you have a lot of challenges, and we do appreciate your intervention. It was very, very interesting. So thank you, and we will share your presentation. Sarah, we have very few minutes, and please.
Just my
yes.
Thanks to Janet, also a very, very long time and close partner of us in MASHAV. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you very much. Sarah, would you like to take over the questions?
Yes, unfortunately, we are running out of time, but there have been a few questions. So I will ask some very brief questions and we'll see how we can get there. The first question, if I can ask the Deputy Prime Minister of North Macedonia. I will move on to Beth Bechdel for a question for you. There's a question about the food situation in refugee camps and what strategies can be utilized to ensure that breastfeeding mothers and women in general have access to food supplies for themselves and for their families as well.
Sure, I'll be very brief in the interest of time. I think it's really important and probably something that I should have mentioned, that as we deal with the immediate emergency and humanitarian response related to COVID and food crisis, this is where our very deep relationship with the World Food Program comes into place, with them being really the single largest provider of these other necessary food supplies that are important. And I know that WFP, in partnership with UNICEF, WHO, are really working to make sure that they prioritize the protection and the promotion and the support of breastfeeding as a life-saving measure, especially in these very difficult, and as you said, refugee populated areas. I probably won't, in the interest of time, describe some of the activities in more detail, but please just know that it is a very high priority emergency need that is being met by a number of our partner agencies here in the UN to make sure that it's an important part of the food security, food crisis response that's being taken as it relates to COVID. Very good question. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you so much. Is the Deputy Prime Minister of North Macedonia still with us? Yes, I see. Yes, great. There is a question about what strategies and advice can you give NGOs and local organizations on how to push and lobby the government in order to support young women and girls, for those, especially for those countries who don't have policies put in place?
It was a cutting in your question.
Oh,
how
I'm sorry.
the civil society organizations
how
are
can we
supporting
lobby? No, how can we lobby the government and push the government to create policies that support women?
To have more women that are activists in the government and in the parliament is the best choice. How you will advocate, because I work as an advocate 6 years from my experience in the civil society, and I moved just few things. But when I became the minister, I have double or 3 times more things done. This means that you can advocate for more women in the institutions, in a decision positions, and after that you will find that all things will go faster in the gender equality.
Okay, thank you very much. More women in governments. It's so important.
And in parliament and in municipalities and everywhere, on all tables where the decisions are made.
Thank you so much. Thank you. A question for Christine Musisi. To date, how can governments respond in policy measures? Which policy measures are appropriate for governments to put in place right now? Where would we start to protect women and girls right now during this pandemic?
It's a very long list, and I think the most important thing to do first is to make sure you have a national response to COVID, which has data that is gender or sex disaggregated, so that we understand what the priorities are. It's also important to include civil society and community in finding the solutions for women. So while you have a national framework, it's also important to have very targeted activities for women at all levels. These activities are related to, you can also have tax breaks and so many other things. It's wide, but I think the mechanism of ensuring that you have a framework in place, you have targeted interventions, you include civil society organizations, women's organizations, and include women in the decision making, I think that's where we could start. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question. I know we're running out of time, but for Janet, can you please just give advice for local organizations or NGOs that have limited resources? What would you say would be the first step that they need to do in order to implement something that supports women and girls and also sustainable communities and environment? From you, Nat.
I would recommend in this scenario, especially in this time of COVID-19 pandemic and the impact it has had on all activities, even including for those of the local NGOs, I would recommend that the NGOs get together. First of all, look for a common ground in terms of what are the impacts, what are the activities they can safely carry out, and safely engage in raising funds amongst themselves or from the communities or from donors. They cannot do this work alone. It is important that we work together. And I think one of the things that has come out from this session is that importance of the civil society working together with other partners, including government. So I would also advise them to reach out to the governments. A number of governments, including where I'm from in Kenya, have a response fund. And it is important that they have a strategic initiative that they would like to be funded for. I mean, they'd like the fund to access the funds from this kind of government funds. It is, like I want to say, it's better that we work together as partners, whether we are together, government, civil society, and also with the United Nations. That's the advice I'd give them.
Thank you so much. I think the time is up for question and answers, unfortunately, for this period, but I'll pass it back to Chava.
Okay, so thank you very much to all the panelists, and we really appreciate you taking time out to be with us, to the Deputy Prime Minister, to the Honorable Beth Bechtel, the FAO, thank you, to Christine, to Janet, thank you all for taking the time to being with us today. It was super informative, and I think we're taking a lot from it, all of us, for our countries and our organizations. So truly, truly appreciate it. And we'll share all the information and the PowerPoints with everyone. Gil, do you want to? We're going on to the next panel.
No, just to echo your thanks to everyone, and yeah, we're looking forward to the next panel.
Okay, we're good. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to go straight on to the next panel. If anybody of the staff wants to take a break, run out, and we'll fill in for you. So up to you. Okay. So we're going to go on to panel 4 now. Building resilience through cooperation and partnership. I will again